So we're going to be talking about the workflow course assignment, what's required, and how to tackle this. In particular, I want to talk about the tests. So that is this section here, the 6 tests that are specified. There's 3 unit tests and there's 3 end-to-end tests. So so in particular, this one and this one and this one, in fact, all 3 of these seem like they are very difficult things to test with Jest because they involve an API, and the whole point of Jest is that you're just testing one little atom at a time. So if you need an API to be running in order to perform your test, you suddenly have a problem. So I'm going to go over solving that problem and the slightly weird sort of mentality that you have to get into when you are testing remote content. I think that these 3 are actually much easier. So I think these 3 tests here are the most difficult thing in the CA. All of these requirements here, these are things that should be quite straightforward in the sense that it's a case of applying the lesson content to an existing repository. So the difficulty is going to come in where there's already a prettier config file, or there's already an ESLint config file, or maybe there's already a pages deploy set up, and working around what's already there. But in terms of originating content, creating content from scratch, this is where your creativity and your lateral thinking is going to be tested the most. Right, so before I start with examples, I think it's a good idea just to talk about how I expect this to be done. So a lot of you are going to be using the social media client, which is on the Noroff FEU GitHub. And when you're arriving here, it might not seem obvious what you should do. Maybe you're just going to do a direct clone. You will notice I actually have all this stuff cloned and forked already, so I can't really go through it through the process from scratch. I'll see if I can maybe create another fork. But the idea here is that you're not going to be cloning this directly. If you were a collaborator, or if you were on our team, so if you're part of this Noroff FEU team, that would be the correct way to approach this. But because you're not in the sort of privileged environment, as in you've not been invited to work on this repository directly, and you don't belong to the organization that owns this repository, the correct way to do this is to create a fork. So you can see that I have one existing here. I'm going to create a new fork, and I'm going to call this demo because we're in a demo session. And you can see that the owner is, okay, so I can't actually create a new fork because I already have one with my username, but I can create a new fork using one of the other organizations that I'm involved with. So I think, let's do it with the Noroff, I'm going to do it with the Noroff organization just to show you. So here, copy the master branch only. That will be fine, because the idea is that I might update the master branch, or another team member might update the master branch, and you're going to have your own branches. So this is fine. You can leave that checked. If you really want to if you want the most up-to-date branch that hasn't been merged in, you can see actually if we go over here, there are 2 branches, and one of them I've updated very, very recently, 10 minutes ago. And there's an open pull request for those changes, and we've got 2 reviewers assigned for that. And as you can see, because of my branch policies, I can't actually complete this until I've had those reviews. So this is because I have gone through the lessons and I've set up branch protection rules I've actually made these a bit more draconian than the rules that are in the lesson. So this is it's much harder to complete a pull request in this repository because I've gone through and added more of these rules. But that's a decision I made based on what was convenient to me. So you should still use the branch rules that are in the lesson. Okay, so we've got, did I complete that? No, I didn't. Okay, so I'm going to complete this by creating the new fork. And now I have my own repo that I control, but it's forked from this original repo. So I can grab this code and set it up somewhere and open it up in Visual Studio Code. You might notice if you're using GitHub Desktop, you get this message here. It says, how are you planning to use this fork? And it says, the options are to contribute to the parent project or for my own purposes. So in every case, in the CA, you are contributing to the parent project. That is the purpose of the CA. You're taking an existing repo, you're doing some work, you're creating a branch containing some useful changes, and then when it's ready, it's going to go back to the original repository. So the pull request is going to span from your fork across to the original repo, and I'll show you that process at the end of the session. So we've forked that, and we can open it up in VS Code, and we can install and run the project as normal, test it out, see if we like it or not, see if it actually works or not. And one thing I will say is that anyone who's expecting this application that has been provided to be perfect or to be free of bugs is sorely mistaken. There are many bugs in this. There are many things that are not perfect. It was written quite quickly by myself over a weekend. So you're not handling a perfect application here, and that's a good thing for the CA. The aim of the CA is not to have a set of 6 tests that always pass, because the application code might not be good enough. So it might be that there's actually a problem in the application and one of your tests always fails. That doesn't mean you're going to fail your CA, because that's not your responsibility. That's the responsibility of the code owner to make sure that their code meets the requirements. And if you have a test that effectively tests the requirements and the repository fails that test, that's not your problem. That's someone else's problem. And this is exactly the mindset that I'm trying to encourage here, is that this is not the same as writing code for yourself. This is a different activity. The responsibilities are different, the consequences are different. So that's my disclaimer about why there are bugs. They're not intentional bugs. I don't know where all of them are, but it is intentionally not a perfect project, as if such a thing can exist in the first place. Okay, so with that out the way, I can run, I think, npm start to run this application, and I see it's very familiar to me. I can log in. And we see something, we see posts. It looks like it's working, although if anyone's actually tried this, if you sort of scroll around and if you refresh a couple of times, you will get a page hang. So if I refresh this, it will probably crash the browser. So anyone else who is experiencing this and is finding it very annoying, I've fixed it in the new pull request. So I'm going to merge that in, and this issue will be gone. So if anyone has found this to be a sticking point, that is fixed, and I'm going to switch over to the fixed version after I have restarted restarted Chrome. Okay, so that's the sort of the most basic. How do I get here? Where do I start? This is where you start in your own fork of the repo that you've chosen to work on. So we still have the same rules around branching. So we are going to have a workflow branch, and that's going to contain all of our changes for the CA. In fact, I'll do this on the command line just to stick to the spirit of the course content. So we've already created our workflow branch. I'm going to check out B and call this ESLint. Okay, so now we're in the branch ESLint, and I would begin installing ESLint and setting up the config files, working through the lesson content. So if we just go and refer to that quickly with Chrome that is not open. So we would be looking at module 2 in this case, and going through and doing stuff like adding prettier and is ESLint in this one? I think it's the next one. Okay, so installing ESLint, setting up ESLint. And we now have okay, so we've got our ESLint config file. We haven't done any customization on that, and we've got our new dependencies. We can see these here, these 3 changes. So I would commit these 2 changes as installs ESLint. And now when I publish the branch, it's going to ask me, do I want to publish this branch to my version or to the original version? And until only the workflow branch should be published to the upstream. So the upstream is the original, where you forked from, and origin is your version. So you can see the demo at the end there, social media client demo.git versus social media client.git. So the workflow branch, when you're finished with it, is going to go upstream, but these sub branches are not. So if you're just doing something like ESLint, or you're just doing something like prettier, those sorts of things are going to stay on origin. And eventually, once you've done all of the things that need to be done, and your workflow branch contains all of the requirements, then at that point you are going to publish that against the upstream, which just means that it can be merged directly into the repository. So the pull request that I initiated before this session, not there, so this pull request that I initiated, I did this work inside of my fork. So I used, that's not what I wanted to do. So I used this fork here, the one with my username, and I did some testing and I found some issues, and I made 10 changes, and I made a branch called fixes, and I pushed that branch to the upstream rather than to the origin. And then I opened a pull request with the upstream. So these are changes I made on a different version of this repo, but now they can be applied to the repo itself. So this is how we work collaboratively. This is the standard format for working on someone else's project. You don't, unless you have prior permission from them, you're not working on their code directly. You're working in a fork, and then you're suggesting that a change be made through a pull request. Right, so back in the project, we've got our workflow branch, we've got our ESLint branch. So I could, let's imagine that I finished setting up ESLint. I'm happy with it. I can check out workflow and I can merge, or I can do a pull request, or I can just merge it directly because I'm the only person who's working on this at the moment. So the visibility of a pull request is not necessarily that important to me right now. So I'm just going to git merge ESLint branch, and now my workflow branch is up to date with ESLint, and I'm going to now create a new branch. Let's do that in the terminal as well. So git checkout B, and I'm going to call this testing. Or let's split it up, unit testing. Okay. So I am going to close this fork because the only I've got this stuff set up elsewhere, and I want to just skip straight to going through the actual idea of how to test this, and I don't want to have to do all the Jest and Cypress setup. So I'm just going to minimize this one for now, and then we can go step out, and now we're in a different project. So this is not tightly coupled. So this is a generic place to provide examples. This is a different repository. You also have access to this repository, so none of the stuff I'm doing in here is going to be out of your reach. But the purpose of this is to go through like pure testing theory. So this is not meant to be like the answer to the CA. This is examples of how to do some of the more difficult tasks in Jest and in Cypress. So I've got two examples here for Jest. I have an API example. So this is just a test asynchronous API fetch function here with some error handling. It's pretty solid in the sense that it rejects an empty ID. It checks if the ID is a valid number, and if it's not, then it will reject that. Then it performs a fetch, and you can see here that the fetch URL is not a real URL. So I could literally just do this, and it doesn't actually matter. And I'll explain why in a second. In reality, this is going to be the Noroff API URL, but as I said, it doesn't actually matter. So this shouldn't be that unfamiliar. It's just a regular fetch function with some extra error handling cases. And then we have something that should be pretty familiar. We have these three local storage functions. So they've got load, save, and remove. And this is a pattern that is pretty well tried and tested by now. So this is code that you might see multiple people writing from scratch, even though they're different developers will approach things in slightly different ways. When it comes to stuff like local storage, it's so well trodden that things have formed up into these very, very familiar patterns. So this is a really standard set of local storage code, and we've got a pretty standard API fetch as well. So anyone who's tried this already has probably run into the problem straight away that fetch is not defined, or that local storage is not defined, that even if you find a way to define fetch, that the API call won't actually take place, and it just doesn't work. It really, really doesn't work. If you try and do this without knowing the approach, it's incredibly frustrating and it feels like it's impossible. But what I'm going to show you is that it's actually easier than it seems, and kind of dumb. Like, the way that we test fetch functions is It's one of these things in the theory of testing. If I go to the introduction, so in these mentalities, stating the obvious is the big time winner when it comes to fetch functions. So we're gonna look at some code that seems like it's just very, very obvious, but it is the correct way to approach this. So how do we test a fetch function? This is my whole file. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cases here, test cases. I'm describing the getItem function, and I'm asserting that it returns a valid item object when provided with a valid ID, that it returns undefined when an HTTP 404 error is received, it returns undefined when an HTTP 500 error is received, it returns undefined when the input is invalid, and it returns undefined when the input is not provided. So these are my assertions about this code, and you can see that each assertion is actually quite the test code for it is actually quite small, and the test code for it is also quite repetitive, which goes to this point here. Repeating yourself in tests is not actually a bad thing, unlike in other types of coding. So you can see that I'm doing a lot of this, expecting item to equal undefined. I do that 4 times, and I'm doing that 4 times for a reason, because in each case I'm changing the way that I'm using the function. So that's why I do these things 4 times. So this is the logic, as in this is the English or almost English part of this task. You'll see here there's some weird code. You've got global.fetch equals jest.function, and then I have this thing called fetch success. So if I remove fetch success, this is all Jest code. This is not my code. I didn't come up with this. This is boilerplate Jest, and this is a way to assign a global variable in Jest. So what do I mean by global variable? Well, you have document, and you have local storage, and you have fetch, and lots of these functions or these objects or these variables that we get to use in JavaScript without first saying const document equals get document, right? The fact that they come for free means that they are global, and the fact that they are global means that they actually belong to the window object. It's just that we don't have to write window dot. And the fact that they belong to the window object is extremely relevant to us when we're writing Jest tests, because Jest tests are not run in a browser. They are run inside Node.js. So there is no such thing as the window. There is no local storage. There is no fetch. It does not exist because there's no browser to do any of those things for you. So it's not a case of fixing that problem and installing these things in Jest. It's a case of faking them. So each of these things we need to fake. And in Jest's terminology, we don't use the word fake, we use the word mock. So this is actually kind of where the name Jest comes from, as in jester. Jester is someone who will often be mocking someone else, and that's sort of where the idea for the name came from. So how do we mock? How do we mock stuff in Jest? Well, this is a mock. This is a manual mock where we're saying there is something that we're expecting to have called fetch, and instead of using the browser function that exists for this, or doesn't exist in our case, we're just going to assign it with our own code. So we're going to have our custom function, and we're going to say fetch returns JSON, right? And then we'll have some JSON in here. So that would allow us, in theory, to fetch and get the JSON like that. In actual fact, we want that to be a function, so we would say like that, except that these things are, this is synchronous, and we know that fetch is asynchronous. So essentially, the way to solve that is by returning a promise instead of just a synchronous value. And I'm going through this quickly because you don't really need to know exactly, like I'm explaining the concept very quickly because you don't actually have to get into the innards, because this doesn't work. Like I'm trying to talk you through how we would construct something that we could await like this. If we did this, all I'm trying to do is figure out roughly how we would instruct JavaScript to create a fake fetch, but we've already done it up here. So I'm deleting all that because it doesn't actually work. This is the one that works. So fetch success. We return a promise. The promise is resolved, and it resolves with these 4 items here, and those are all things that you would normally have on the response object. So you'd normally have response.ok, response.json, response.status, and response.status text. These are all normal things that you get as part of the fetch response object. But in this case, we are manually setting them. So I'm saying that this is a function where it will always return as if there was a successful fetch function. It's every time I call this, it's like if I do response, so in this case, this item would be whatever value we placed in here. So I could say item equals test item. So it's a little bit weird, I know, but the purpose of this function is to pretend to be fetch and always to succeed. Because we're not, this code that we're testing, we're not actually testing the API. We're not testing, does the API work or not? We're testing, does this function do what it says it does with the data it gets from the API? It's not actually possible to, well, it is possible to test an API with unit tests, but those tests belong on the API code, not on the client code. So there will be a separate set of tests that are running against the API to make sure the API is working. And it's not the job of client-side unit testing to make sure that the API is healthy. It's the job of client-side unit testing to make sure that client-side code does what it says it does. This code promises to get an item. So we're testing to see whether it can get an item. And the only thing that might stop it from getting an item is if either this argument is wrong or is inappropriate, or if there's a network error. And we don't just want to wait and see if there is a network error. Like imagine you're testing and you're trying to test all of the different network errors. Are you just going to wait until one kind of comes up, or like you need to force that error? You need to make sure that error is happening. And instead of sending like a bad request to a real server, we can just create our own bad request. So down here I have a similar function, and it's called fetch failure. It doesn't have any JSON, although we could add like a error message there, but I don't need that. This function it takes a status, it takes a status text, and it pretty much just parrots that back to you in a promise. So it's a very, this is what I mean by dumb. This is very dumb code. It's like redundant, but this is how we do it. And redundant or seemingly redundant code is one of the weird things to get used to with testing. So how do we actually use this? So let's just pick the first test here. Returns a valid item object when provided with a valid ID. So here we are setting which of our mock functions is going to replace fetch in this situation. So in this situation, we want a success because we are looking at a successful scenario or a success case. So we want the API call to be a success, and we can see that it's going to return test item. So what are we going to do? We're going to fetch that item. Sorry, set the mock function, then fetch our item exactly how we would normally with our code, and then we're going to have a very straightforward expect item to equal test item. And as long as this function works correctly, that will pass. If a change was made to this function, this may not pass in the future, but right now it is going to pass. So let's just run that on its own. I'm going to rename this just to stop it from running as well. And if I've got any other tests, I'm just going to delete those for now. So when I run test unit, we should just have that single test running, and we can see that it's passed. So this tells us that on a good day, our function does exactly what it's supposed to. But that's not the only case that we want to cover. So next we have returns undefined when an HTTP 404 error is received. And if we peek at our code, we have this block here, if response is okay, and then this block or this statement will run if the response is not okay. It's equivalent to doing this. So same thing, has the same behavior, and it means that if the response status is not 200, i.e. okay, then it's going to throw this error. So we can use the fetch failure, which I have commented out here. We can use this fetch failure. If we don't provide any arguments, it's going to use 404. So the first test I have doesn't have any arguments. And if we check that with test unit, we see 2 passed because we attempted to fetch and we forced the function to return a 404, and the function's default behavior is to return undefined in the catch block. So anything that throws an error up here is going to return undefined down here. So likewise, we can test a 500 error. So here we've just updated this. We've updated this method to have a code and a message internal server error, and it works exactly the same way. If we run this again, we can actually see the console warning there. So we can see that the function is correctly getting this mock instead of using real fetch. And maybe I should just show you what it looks like if you don't have that mock there. So now we've got okay, so I suppose this is actually quite a good example of like when something unexpected happens. So these tests will pass even if the system is not working, which is a little bit of a problem, because they shouldn't really have passed. Yeah, I need to think about how to fix that. So maybe expecting undefined is wrong, and maybe I should be expecting null, and this should return null instead to differentiate between. Anyway, I'm not gonna do that now because that's just I'm gonna go down a different rabbit hole. So we had this one, and then these last two are testing. They're testing arguments. So in this case, I'm providing the string banana, which is not a number. So that should trigger the error case. And if I come here, I can see error ID is not a number. And finally, if there's no input or no ID provided at all, then I'm also going to get a failure case and a no ID provided message. So this is a lot of coverage for a function. As per the CA guidelines, you don't need to provide this much coverage for each function, but this is sort of the way, like, this is the way to think about it. Like, what are all the little avenues I can go down where I'm just changing one thing at a time and expecting something slightly different to happen? And the important thing here is that anytime you're touching fetch, you have the responsibility to fake your fetch result. It's not that hard. You just have to, what you can do if you have no idea what to put in here, you can go into your app and make a few real requests and look at them in the network tab and look at what the stuff says. Look at what the response object looks like when you make that request, and copy the response object and use that. You could have a very detailed version of this. I've just used the minimum, these 4 properties, because those are the only 4 that I'm touching with my test, but you could have lots more properties, or you could have fewer properties. Maybe you just want to have that, just have the JSON output, but you will need some sort of mock function. This is the simple or the straightforward way to do mock functions. There is a more advanced way to write them so that they're reusable, but I think in the context of the CA, this is enough to use. Take a look. Oh yes, so we've been through the fetch mocking process or concept, and now I'm going to take a look at storage. So we've got this file with our storage functions, and we need to test these. So local storage is another thing where in the environment that Jest runs, i.e. Node.js, there is no such thing as local storage. Only the browser has local storage. So when we're testing this, we need to do something very, very similar to testing fetch, except we need to be mocking the shape of local storage instead of the shape of the response object. So this is not my code. I found this online and I thought it was so nice and cleanly written and clever that I stole it, or I borrowed it from the original author. And this is a JS class that effectively just behaves exactly like local storage behaves. So it's a fake local storage, a mock local storage. And this time we, unlike this test where each different, each assertion requires a slightly different mock to be run, in this case, we want the same mock to be run on all of them because local storage itself doesn't change. So this local storage mock object is we want it to be running on all of our tests. So we have the declaration outside of the tests. So here you can see the declaration is inside global.fetch, global.localStorage, global.fetch, global.localStorage. These are outside the scope of the tests, so these are going to apply to every single one of these. And these are inside the scope of the test, so they are going to change from test to test. So on the basis that we've got this class behaving as if it is our local storage object, we can call this in exactly the same way that we call local storage. So if we take a look at this first test here, we've got our target key, which is basket, our target value, which is an array with 2 strings, the serialized value, which is the result of JSON.stringify, because local storage can only save simple strings, so we need to convert our complex data into strings before we save it or encode it. And then we have a call to the save function, so that is this function here. We're calling that function and we are providing the key and the value, and we're expecting that when we reference local storage directly with this key, that we should see the serialized version of the array. So we're not gonna, if we did this, it would fail because this is an array and local storage is only capable of storing strings. So whatever we get from this is going to be a string. We know that 100%. It's either going to be undefined or it's going to be a string. So we can't compare directly to the array. We have to compare to the serialized version of the array. Otherwise it just won't work. And then the same sort of logic applies in the next test. So in this case, we've testing that we can save an array. In this case, we're testing we can load an array. So we have to save that array all over again, and then we have to load it. We can't just do this and load the key, because each one of these blocks is its own little universe. So this local storage is not necessarily going to be persistent in the same way that our local storage is on our browser. So everything like this, we have to be declarative. We have to repeat ourselves. So even though we've done this before, we need to do it again because we still have to remove something and we need to guarantee that there is something to remove. If we were just relying on what's going on here, there's a chance that this test might fail because of this test. And that's the worst thing that can happen in unit testing. Every single test should be able to run on its own. 100% of the time, if the test above it or the test below it fails, it should not matter to that test at all. And if you do have tests that are interrelated like this, it's a sign that you need to sort of repeat yourself more and isolate these actions a bit more. So we've got save and then load, then we have remove. So in order to remove, we have to save, then we have to load to check that we saved correctly, then we have to remove, then we have to load again to check that the value has changed to undefined. So this is telling a bit of a story, and this is sort of mimicking how we would test this in like DevTools, for example. If I was testing that this was working, I'd go to the application tab and I would click a few buttons and I would check the application tab to see if the storage value has updated or been removed. So altogether, I can run these, and we have the fetch, oh, what is that error? Saying fetch failure is not defined. I think I might have broken this test. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly revert my changes there. Try that again. So those errors are all expected. Okay, so everything is passing. Sorry, just getting mixed up here. Okay. So we've looked at local storage and we've looked at API fetches. They both involve mock functions. I think that this is actually enough to tackle the CA, because the CA is going to be a combination of these. If we look at the course assignment requirements, we have to check the login function, and the login function must return a valid token when provided with valid credentials. So we can't actually check that it's valid, as in we can't log into the API with the token to make sure that it's actually a token that works on the API. That's not really what is intended here. We need to check that we get a token, i.e. a long string, when providing valid credentials, i.e. an email address and a password. So this is actually the most important part of this test, because we don't have any control over the API. So that valid token is just going to be part of your mock function. The valid credentials is the important part. Can you log in with invalid credentials and still get that token? That's the answer that needs to be, that's the question that needs to be answered here. So this is about checking the credentials and expecting the function to fail or to give some sort of indication that the credentials are not right. So if I'm passing in a number instead of an email address, and I'm passing in an array instead of a password, that would be fairly invalid credentials. So that's sort of how to think about this one. The logout function clears the token for browser storage. So I think that should be quite straightforward based on the storage tests that we have looked at. You're going to run the logout function, and you're going to check whether the token is there or not. In terms of number 3, create item. So this is also going to be using the fetch mock. You're going to have a mock function that represents a successful 201 response, which is 201 created successfully or something like that. So in this case, that the new item is going to be defined in your code here. Like here, test item. This is my new item. The best thing to do is to actually go onto your API and save some JSON. So save like a list of posts as a JSON file, and then you can use real examples instead of using these kind of like minimal examples. But that is what it's meant by create a new item on the API. It might seem confusing to have API there, and maybe I should remove that, because it sort of suggests that you are actually going to be sending it directly to the API. But that is impossible well, it's not impossible, but it's not the purpose of unit testing, and it's not the purpose of what we're asking for here in this assignment. So I think that these 3 can be solved with those 2 test files we've been through already. And then these are a little bit different, and this is probably where the most variation is going to exist. These are the hardest types of tests to make reliable. So I spent a couple of hours writing Cypress tests this morning. I wasn't able to make them reliable. So it's it's difficult because there's lots of if you think about end-to-end testing, unit testing as testing one atom, end-to-end testing is the whole galaxy or the whole universe. So there's a lot more that can move around whilst you're testing, and there's a lot more that can break whilst you're testing or change whilst you're testing. So for example, if a variable needs to be false, it might not always be false every time you visit the page. Because there might be some other background function that runs that's related to something else that changes that variable. So if you run the test 5 times, you might get one result 3 times and another result 2 times. That's called flakiness, and that's the thing that we don't really like to see in a test because it makes that test, we can't be so confident in that test because we know that there's a chance that it might fail randomly. So with end-to-end testing, the reason they're difficult is because they tend to be very flaky. The reason unit tests are very effective is because they are not flaky. They're really, it's much easier to make them robust. It's much easier to make sure that when you run the same test 1,000 times, it's going to give you the same result 1,000 times. Having said that, end-to-end testing is way more fun and interactive than unit testing, and I find it less frustrating. So it may not be, it provides a different thing to unit testing, but it is a little bit more sort of engaging. Okay, so let's take a look at the end-to-end tests. So I've got this file client.cy.js, and I'm in the process of converting an existing set of tests over to a new URL. So I've written all of these tests out already using one project, and now I am switching over to a different project. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm trying to find a set of tests that are going to work on any project, which is making my job even more difficult than it is to begin with, because I want a set of tests that I can run on every single submission that's going to provide some sort of coverage, but that's not what you have to do. So you're interested in testing one particular application, so there's less sort of less for you to worry about in terms of variation. But so let's take a look at what I am testing with. This is the slightly improved version of our social media client. So it's improved in the sense that it has redirects. The current one doesn't really do redirects for some reason. And I got rid of a memory leak as well. So if we come in here, we can see, there we go. We can add emojis, we can comment on posts, I think. Okay, so it's a functional front end for the social media API, and we as unit testers want to do stuff like clicking on things, and we want to be changing pages, and we want to be typing in here and clicking comment and clicking log out and clicking search and trying all of these things, because this is the purpose of unit testing, to do what a human would do. So what I was doing here is I have got 2 describe blocks, so I'll just uncomment these. I have 2 describe blocks, and the first one is titled Social Media App Unauthenticated User. The second one is called Social Media App Authenticated User. So these are 2 different suites, I suppose is the best way to put it. And in the first one, before each test, so we're going to test the unauthenticated user So obviously they're not going to be logged in, they're just going to be hitting the site directly, and we have certain assertions that we're going to make about their experience. So we're going to assert that they cannot visit the profile page, they cannot visit the post page, but they can visit the register form, and they can, in my case, view, because it's a modal rather than a page. So in this case, it's going to be view the login page or form and view the register form. And I'm just going to copy this because it's very similar. And I'm going to comment that stuff back out. And we can run test end to end. And we're going to run our client suites. I think I actually didn't finish those. Yeah, so I didn't finish this test because it's all good and well to click register, but I'm not doing anything. I'm not doing anything after that. Like I'm just clicking register and then there's nothing else happening. So I would need to add something like a statement to look for, like maybe I'm looking for this, or I'm looking for this button. That would be quite a good one. So I could cy.get button. I know it's going to be inside a form, and I know it's going to be type submit because the other ones are not. The other ones are reset and type button. So I'm going to have form button type submit, and I'm going to assert that it contains the text create profile. So if this process is successful, we should see a form and it should contain this button. So it is telling me that, okay, so it's telling me that that the thing I'm trying to click on is being covered by another element, as in if I try and click on this create profile button here, I can't because the modal's blocking me. In this case, I'm going to add force because I don't really care about that. So I'm just telling it that I don't really mind that that's the case. And here we've got tried to find the element form button type submit, but never found it. Okay, it doesn't have a type, that's why. So I can remove the type, try again. And we can see that that test is now passing. So it found the button, and that button indicates that we're in the right place. We might want to say should be visible to make sure that we haven't just found an element that's like randomly hiding somewhere in our markup and is not actually being shown to the user right now. So I think that this format is going to be useful for the login form as well because they're very similar. I'm also going to force that true. And we've got, sorry, that's noisy. We've got a different button here, login. Okay, so in this case, I'm not sure why that one fails. Let's see. So contains login. It's not finding the button. It's not really opening the modal by the looks of it. So I'm just going to check that I have not done anything stupid. Check that this button here is what I'm meant to be targeting. So data auth equals login. Data auth equals login. It's inside the header. There's a lot of doing this when you're testing, running the same thing over and over again and getting slightly different results. So I don't. Oh right, okay. So the reason it's finding the wrong button in this case. Can view the login form. I need to find this button here. So instead of this is like what I'm thinking about and what I'm processing at the moment is actually my application's behavior, not the test I'm writing. So I'm trying to think of how this works and what's the easiest path to the login form. So if you come to the home page without being logged in, you're always going to see the register form, and then this button is what we need to target instead of this button. So that's where we're going wrong here. So I need to take the register modal, and then I want the login button inside that register modal, and I'm going to click that button. So now we should find that button if the selector is correct. I missed the ID there. There we go. So now our test is passing because I found the best route to it based on the behavior of this application. So if you have pages, it's much easier. Like if you have a login page, you can just say cy.visit and then put the address of your login page. So for those of you who are not using a single page application style, which I think hopefully is most of you, you can just say login.html or login like that. That makes life a lot easier for testing, this kind of testing. I'm doing this because it's a bit of a challenge. And then we can do stuff as well. Like so, these tests are actually quite easy. They're quite sort of surface level. This is where things get interesting when we're dealing with auth, because we actually have to log in properly each time. So before we do anything auth, we have to type in the username, type in the password, and log in sort of normally like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disable all of these, and I'm going to I'm just going to run this one test here. So I'm expecting that the local storage, that's going to be wrong. It's going to be something like token. So if I just test this out here, token. So in my code, I want to check that this token is not null, i.e. it exists. And what I'll do as well is I'll slow this down, delay. Okay, so this, I know why this one's failing. It's because when we load the page as unauthed, we see the register, we don't see the login. So the first thing we need to do is click this button to switch to the login form. So that's going to be similar to this. In fact, identical to that. So we're clicking the visible login button inside the register modal, and then we are going to hopefully get the input. So this is saying that it found the email thing, the email so it says that it found the right button. Click that button. It then says that it got the email input and failed to type. I don't know why it would fail to type. It's finding 2 items, so I'm just going to get rid of that stuff. This should be okay. I don't really know why it's not switching that form when it clicks. Let's see, so authenticated, we come in, so we're clearing local storage, so we can't be logged in. Going to the home page, viewing this modal, finding the button that contains the word login, clicking that button, and then nothing is happening after that, which is really annoying. And I don't see any difference with how that's been used above. Okay, well, I'll see if I can get the email going, at least. So it's finding, oh, right. I've got it. Okay, so on this page, there's this form, and there's also this form, the login form. And they're 2 separate forms. They're not the same form. So Cypress is finding 2 duplicate elements, and it doesn't know which one to use. So I need to be specific, and I need to say that I'm looking for the login modal input. And I'm going to say that that should be visible as well. So let's see if that gives us slightly better results. Login modal. So it's not visible, but I don't know why, because I'm clicking this button. Yeah, you won't have this sort of problem if you have like a register page and a login page, because you won't have more than one of the same element on the same page, hopefully. I think maybe I need to close, like, okay, so So far, I'm not getting that far with my approach, so maybe the answer is a slightly different approach. We know that we're going to get this form popping up. Maybe I should close the form and click this button instead as a path to get there. So we can try that instead. We want to locate this button, which is going to be the register form. Maybe I just got the register modal. So register form. Type reset. So let's just try this. Okay, and then if we can click the header. So this is going to be the header login button. Header button, and we've got data auth is the data attribute I'm using here, equals login. This is what I mean when I'm talking about like end-to-end testing being more difficult, because you're working with a live beast here. You're working with all of these complex interactions, and in cases like this, it's not working how I expect it to, and I'm not really sure what I'm doing wrong. I think maybe they're both open. So if we see there, they're both open, and the register one is in front of the login one. Okay, so I want to try this once more because it's really frustrating me, and it should be straightforward. So we are coming in, we're clearing our storage, we're visiting, in fact, let's do that afterwards. We're visiting the site, we're clearing our storage, and then we want to get, let's try this one here. So button close, it's the register modal button close. Okay, enable that one, so it should switch. It doesn't. It doesn't close that thing, and I can even see the highlight. I can even see the highlight around the button where it has obviously been touched, but it is just not closing. This is exactly what end-to-end testing is actually for, because this is probably telling me that there's some sort of issue with this, the way I've arranged this, that that maybe there's a clash, or there's I shouldn't have both of these modals able to be fired at once, or what have you. But yeah, as to why that is not closing properly, like I'm just going to try clicking it twice. Why not? Nope, even if I click it twice, and even if I click this button as well, I bet you it's not going to do it. All right, I think if I keep trying this, I'm gonna I'm gonna lose my sanity because I don't know why this thing is not closing. But hopefully this has given you some idea. You know what I can do? I'm going to get rid of all the changes I've made in this session and run this against the original. So this is a student submission, and this is the original test suite that I wrote. So this is what I've been trying to get back to in this session, is this level of reliability, and I'll just run through that again because it happens quite fast. But this is what I'm trying to recreate using my own submission, basically. And I'm using the devmeets repo here instead, and because this uses individual HTML files for each of the views instead of using a single page application structure like I have used in my one, which was kind of a bad idea, this means that it's a lot easier and quicker to write these tests and to make sure they're reliable. So if we run through these again, okay, so what do? We actually created, so we really logged in. We logged in on the API. As you can see, I'm logged in as Cypress, and we created a real post, and then we deleted the same post again. So I'll run that again so you can see. So we're logging in, we're logging out, and now we're logging in, creating a new post, and logging back in and finding that new post and deleting it again. So you can see there's now no post anymore. Let's do it one more time for fun. And it happens so quickly that you can barely even see anything happening, but it does happen. And I find I find this, okay, so we had a flake there. So you can see that we ran it a few times and we got all successes, and then we ran it again and we had a failed test here. So this is a sign that the test needs to be improved, because we should be able to get the same result every time we run the test. We shouldn't be getting random failures like that. Sometimes it's a fact of life that you can't really avoid them because of the way the application works, but a good test tries to minimize that flakiness as much as possible, and I have a feeling this one's going to fail as well. Yeah. So this is, it's now my job to go and figure out what exactly is going wrong with this test and why it's not finding this this class here. But hopefully this is how it should look, right? Like even if you have one or two failed tests, that doesn't mean that you failed necessarily. We are going to be marking the tests in their own right. So it doesn't matter whether all of these tests come up as red, as long as all of the tests make sense and that they are actually testing the right things. So it's not about turning all of these things green, and it's not about writing really bizarre tests just to make sure they pass. It's more about trying to write common sense tests that follow exactly what the user would do. So where's the user going to click? They're going to click on the search bar. What is the user going to do then? They're going to type item 1, and then they're going to hit the button. So that's how your test needs to be described, as a series of user motions, basically. All right. Suggestions. So I don't think, I'm not sure if Trigger was going to do anything. Well, anyway, I'm over it. I have my fun trying to fix that. I'm going to do that in my own time. But yeah, if you have questions, I know this stuff is very new, and it's so what I'll say about the value of this stuff is that being a developer who can test effectively makes you more employable, it makes you faster, it makes you more reliable, and it means that you're going to be embarrassed less often in your career. And when I say embarrassed, I mean literally red face, feeling like an idiot embarrassed. There have been so many times in my career when I am presenting work to the rest of the company, so it's quite common to do like a monthly or a quarterly presentation to the rest of the company to tell them what you've been doing as a developer. And I'll have worked on something for a month or 2 months, and I'm really proud of it, and I think it's going to change this business, and they're going to be really happy when they see it. And then I turn up at the premiere, and I just didn't test something properly, and now I'm sitting in front of 100 people, and it's not working, and I'm clicking the same thing, and I know it's just not going to work. And like, you have to just backpedal and apologize, and it sucks. And the only way to make sure this never happens is by having really good testing, because then you don't have to worry about these things cropping up without you knowing about them. You'll have a readout with every single one of your tests saying passed, and as long as those are all passed, you're good and you can sleep at night. So testing is about peace of mind. It's about covering your own bases. Like, without tests, you have to manually test everything every single time you make a change. If you make a change to your login function, you have to go check that you can still create a post correctly. That shouldn't be the case. You should be able to automatically see a readout if something has gone wrong in some part of your application. And the only way to do that is with a test structure. So it's not like a nagging thing. You will hear people asking you to write tests, but it's not a nagging thing. It's like a quality thing, and it's really for you less than it is for me. It's also something developers don't do very often. They like to avoid doing it. They like to brush it off and make it someone else's problem. And as a result, QA is an incredibly prestigious and well-paid form of development where all you do all day is write tests and break other people's work. So it's a very good option as a career path, especially as like a temporary thing or like a contract work. Just spend a couple of months breaking someone's new application, getting paid for it, and then you don't have to write any code. You just send the developers all of their problems. You've got 1,000 bugs, go fix them, and you don't have to worry about the solutions to them. So being a tester is actually kind of fun because you don't have any of the responsibility to fix the issues, but you're the one who's always pointing them out, and you're the one who's sort of really doing a lot of work for the developer in that situation. All right, so hopefully I've scared you into understanding why tests are important now, and they are difficult. I find it kind of difficult to do them. I don't think anyone is perfect at this. And the point of this CA is that you have exposure to tests. We're not expecting you to be like the greatest tester in the world. You just need to know what they are, how they look, and roughly how they work, so that when you join a workplace and they have an existing test set, you can jump straight into that. You don't have to learn it from scratch. And in terms of interviewing, this is a great question to ask a company you're being interviewed by. Ask them about their approach to testing, their approach to quality assurance. Ask them whether they use Cypress, whether they use end-to-end testing, whether they use Jest. And if the answer is no, or if the answer is an awkward silence, then that might be a sign that the place that you're interviewing for might not be as hot as they say they are, because any kind of professional development has test-driven development as part of that process. So if they're not driving their development with tests, they may not be exactly the super professional group of developers that they claim to be, is the best way to put it. Yeah, I was going to do some stuff on GitHub Actions. Okay. So I assume that the main thing is testing with actions. I think the pages and the installing and I think that stuff is kind of, I want to say straightforward, relatively straightforward. If I open this up, okay, so let's set up a simple action for this one. So this is my fork. So if I go to...
Your stream's off, by the way.
Oh, yeah. All right, so I'm in, no, that's not right. I want social media. Okay, so I can come in here and I did have a workflow and then I deleted it. So I'm just going to clear these runs out quickly. Okay, so we're going to create a new workflow. The purpose of this workflow is going to be to release to pages. So I'm going to start off by searching pages so that I can get this static HTML template. And I'm going to create a new branch called Actions, create the new file, call this something else. Do I have this already? Okay, so I do have this, but let's, yeah, I'll create one from scratch anyway, just to show you. So I'm just gonna go with the boilerplate. So I haven't actually changed anything. It's just the absolute standard, the standard code that I was given, and I'm going to, I want to delete that as well in my branch. So I'm just going to remove this existing one. Okay, so we just have the one YAML file, and if I go in here and I run the workflow, I can deploy my stuff to pages, and it's not going to work exactly how I want it to, which is why I just accepted the standard template. I didn't change anything in that template, and we're going to see that that doesn't quite work out for me. Okay, so 18 seconds, pretty quick. And I don't think I should be seeing that. I think I'm seeing a cached version of this. So if I go, let's try a different browser. Okay, that's a bit of a surprise to me. Because it's not actually going to, oh, and I've crashed Chrome on the old version there. So it shouldn't have all the CSS because I didn't do a build, and I'm kind of wondering how it actually managed to render so nicely, because I was expecting it to be, for all the styles to be broken. you will notice, oh, I know what I did. So I actually did this in I did this in a previous commit, so that's why it's not showing up. So previously the styles were broken because I've got this subdomain, so not subdomain, I've got this social media client in my URL. So I had to change my I had to change the links to let's find the index file. Like home had to be ./ instead of /, and the style sheet had to be .source and .dist and .node modules to make sure that the path was going to match correctly. So that was one change I had to do just to get the to get this stuff working. And then I also added a build step. So I've killed my Chrome again. I need to really get that issue sorted. Okay, so to accommodate for this, I had to change my links a little bit, which in the CA, that's what I'm talking about. So in the CA, that is the changes. The project is configured for hosting. So in this example, if we look at the pull request, one of those configuration changes I made was in the index HTML file. Where's that? Oh, here it is to the top. So in this file, I did some formatting, obviously, which has made it a little bit harder to read, but you can see that href, before it was just a /, I changed that to a, yo, this is really hard to read. Header, yeah, so here, I changed it to /, and so on and so forth. If we go to the repo again, so oh right, I know what's happening. Okay, so the old action is still running, so I'm gonna merge this pull request, and I'm going to just force it through. Okay, so now we've got the correct YAML file. The issue before was that we had the wrong YAML file. Okay, great. Now I can show you it breaking properly, because I didn't want to show you success. I wanted to show you the opposite of success and how to recover from that. Okay, so that is the 403 error. If you see that one, that is usually related to this setting over here. If you set this to GitHub Actions, then you will not get that issue. You can run it again and check that that was the case. Did that work? Yeah. Okay, there we go. That's what I wanted to show you. This is what it looks like if you don't customize the action at all. If you just use the blank GitHub Pages action, this is what you're going to get. And the reason you're going to get this is that the node modules file folder is missing, the dist folder is missing, and these are causing 404 errors, so the styles can't load, and it's not what we want at all. So clearly we need to change something here, and presumably we need to change something inside this file. So what are we missing? We're missing node modules, and we're missing CSS from dist. So there's two things to add here. And we need to, before we do the pages stuff, and after we've checked out the repository, so in between here is where we want to be doing our new actions. So name, first one is going to be install. And to install our dependencies, we run npm i. Once that's installed, we can then build Sass in our case with npm run build. So that's all we need to add to make sure that we've got all of the files ready at the time when they are deployed. Otherwise we're just deploying the content that is directly, like everything that is like dark gray here is not going to get pushed up. So we need to run npm i to get node modules. We need to run npm run build to get dist. And then once that is done, we can release everything, and we should have all of the CSS and all of the JavaScript and everything from Bootstrap that we want. And we should see a little bit better. Yeah, so there we go. We can log in. We can create a profile. We can do everything that we need to do. And all we had to do is add 4 lines of YAML. And of those 4 lines of YAML, only 2 of them are actually particularly important. So that is a demo on a basic action. Then in the lessons, we also have we have these automated testing actions. So the idea here is very simple, right? Like if we compare this workflow to the workflow we were just in, they're very, very similar. We have, getting lost here. We have on push, and in this case we have on pull request, on workflow dispatch, on workflow dispatch. These permissions, these are only needed for GitHub Pages. Concurrency is only needed for GitHub Pages, although we might actually want to it might be a good idea to adapt this, although we don't have to do that. And then in the jobs section, we've got checkout, we've got setup node, install, run tests. And over here, we've got checkout, install, then we have build Sass, which is slightly different, and then we have the pages stuff. So it's really just that, that isn't included. Instead, we have npm run tests, and everything up before this is very, very similar. Like actions are typically quite similar to each other. So in this case as well, like when it comes to Cypress, we run Cypress with this special action, which just is designed to make things a bit more efficient. So running actions actually cost money. It's free if you have a public repo, but you pay for every second that you're running an action if you're using a private repository. So the purpose of this particular package is to actually save money by using less time to run Cypress. So you could run Cypress in the same way. You could run it like this, just changing test unit to test end-to-end CLI, but this is much more efficient. So this is why we're using this cypress.io GitHub action there. I am not going to go through this in detail because the session's been going for a while and I'm tired, and there also needs to be a little bit of challenge left in the CA. But if you've got your unit tests running in the command line, you've got your end-to-end tests running in the command line, and you have your GitHub pages YAML file set up, it's not that big of a leap to get this stuff done. It may present you with a few configuration problems. Like, one of the things that can happen is you lock yourself out of being able to merge because you have bad tests that won't pass, and now you can't merge an improvement to those tests. But there are ways around these things. So I'm gonna leave it there. But hopefully that has at least given you a look into how to think about actions.